No, I just want to summarize really what it's about, and that is that this is a methodology, a simple methodology for paying taxes into a conditional trust and making sure the government does what you want it to do, and you don't just give a blank check to the government to spend your money in whatever way it chooses. And we are reversing the power from the government to us as individuals.
Absolutely, absolutely. But if you decide that you want to preserve your privacy and make sure all the data that goes in and out of your computer is encrypted, then check out NordVPN. My affiliate link will give you something like a 2/3 discount on some of their packages.
The world has failed, I tell you. The world has failed yet again.
Hi everybody, this is Crypto Rich, and in this video I'm going to talk about how you can preserve some of your money and also how you can engage in legal protest by withholding your taxes, legally withholding your taxes. I'm joined by Chris Coverdael. He's been on my channel quite a few times and hopefully quite a few times again. Now, before I introduce him, please subscribe, follow me on Twitter, CryptoRichYT, join my official Telegram announcement channel. And if you're watching this in YouTube, please come and support me on bit.ly/CryptoRich3Speak or bit.ly/CryptoRichOdyssey or bit.ly/CryptoRichRumble. Hey, Chris, thank you so much for joining. It's good to speak.
Delighted. Delighted.
Yes. Yeah, now you've been on a few times, right? And mine's that you anti-war, you're this rabid, committed anti-war campaigner. You have this absurd, probably far-right notion that people shouldn't be killed, that our governments shouldn't cause genocide and all of that, right? Shouldn't support genocide or do genocide.
Yep.
You found a way where people can legally withhold their taxes as protest because it's against statute to give money to any agency that engages in or supports genocide or terrorism, either participating in that or funding that or supporting those that carry that out. And that's because of international regulations. And we're not going to go into it now, but I'm going to point people to a video that you and I, we've done quite a few videos where we explain the whole process, right? Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, very good.
Okay, good. I have been paying attention. And your website is probityco.org or probityco.com.
Correct.
Yep. And also I have a bit.ly link, bit.ly/makewarhistory. That'll take you to that website, and then it helps us track traffic to that website as well. And it's easy to remember, bit.ly/makewarhistory. Okay. And then one of the things that we've talked about in the video, well, actually, do you want to say a little bit about the elements of that, and then we can start talking about one particular element?
Yes, basically, just a little bit, very brief history. In 2002, I was looking as an anti-war activist. I started to investigate the laws of war and discovered that the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the Prime Minister and the Attorney General had been deceiving us for 75 years, the whole nation, over the illegality of war. And I started to look into this and found that we had introduced we had agreed to international agreements, conventions, statutes, whatever you like to call them, treaties with the rest of the world. The first being the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, which introduced the criminal court in The Hague and introduced 6 crimes into English law. English and Welsh law, and they were war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and conduct ancillary to war crimes, conduct ancillary to crimes against humanity, and conduct ancillary to genocide. And when I started to look into it, I found that the key component of conduct ancillary was providing the means for the commission of the crime.
Hmm.
And I realized that that meant the money, the materials, the weapons, the troops, the training, the recruitment, all the rest of it that goes into funding war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide by our armed forces in other people's countries. The crucial thing for me was to discover that every time I paid tax, I was acting as conduct ancillary to the crimes committed by our government and troops overseas. So I had therefore had to lawfully stop paying tax. So I did in 2003 and did so for 10 years or so. And found out in 2014, I moved to Rye in Sussex, and having exposed some of the criminality in the local council and the town council and so on, I was sent to prison for non-payment of council tax. They called it willful refusal. That happened 3 years in a row, and I thought, well, I've got to find a different way around this. And so I started to investigate, how do our leaders manage to get away with their crimes and hide all their money overseas so they don't pay any tax and we have to pay all the taxes. And so I discovered that the main component, the system that they use, is called a trust. And they put all their money overseas in tax havens in trust. Now, what happens when you...
Hold on a second. Hold on a second, Chris. Now, if people, we're going to talk about trusts and where they come from and what they are and everything, right? But essentially, the system of legally withholding tax as protest is, if people go to the website, bit.ly/makewarhistory, they can download the documents, read all about it, and people sign a deed of sovereignty, and also there's a
declaration of conditional revocable discretionary trust.
Yes, and there's a which says, and essentially the argument is, you can have the money provided you can prove that I'm not breaking the International Criminal Court Act or the Terrorism Act by giving you the money, and you're not breaking those acts by asking me for the money, because some of that money goes to fund the killing of people in Yemen and Ukraine and Gaza.
Exactly.
Right.
That's a good summary.
That's a good summary, right? And the thing we're going to talk about is the trust fund. So, if somebody's got capital gains tax due and they download the documents and they sign, it's very easy to fill in. It's like only 4 or 5 fields or something in the deed of sovereignty and the notice of, or the trust documents, right?
Yes.
And I get someone who's not a family member to sign as a witness.
Yes.
Send the copy, keep the original in an envelope with the 10% of the proceeds or 5% of the proceeds in that envelope, or a promissory note, and then that's it.
Yes. Broadly, they're not actually proceeds, it's the 10% of your tax demand.
Right. 10% of the tax amount. Okay. So, and when I've asked you this before, you've said by giving them the trust documents, people will have paid the tax. So
yes.
This makes no sense to me, because there's no money being sent. So what is it? So what are these trusts? Where do they come from? And how can they not say, no, you've not sent us anything? Hence this conversation about trusts.
Yes, right. So let me answer that question first.
Right.
The key is a trust is very similar to setting up a will in this country. Now, you want to pass your money to your grandchildren or whatever it is after you've died. And so you write out a will saying, okay, I pass £100,000 to Johnny, and providing he doesn't marry Sally and he joins the family firm by the age of 25. So that is a trust. You are putting the money in trust for Johnny, providing he meets certain conditions. And you don't have to hand the money over at that time. It comes out of your estate, and your trustees will make sure that the conditions in your trust Johnny has met. And if he meets them by the age of 25, then he gets the £100,000. And if he doesn't, the money goes to secondary beneficiaries of some sort or another, which you have written into your will. Now, that is basically the process of putting money in trust with trustees for Johnny, your grandson, providing certain conditions are met. And that is a legal documentation and the way trusts work in the English-speaking world.
Okay. Okay, but now, say with the HMRC, they're saying, look, you owe us this money,
Right.
and then how can I put conditions?
Well, it's very important to put conditions. You see, we've been paying tax for 1,000 years, probably, on the assumption that our government will use our money for lawful purposes. And certainly for the last 100 years or so, they have never used our money solely for lawful purposes. They use 10% for mass murder and genocide and crimes against humanity, crimes against peace, whatever, a whole range of the worst crimes known to mankind.
Mm. And
our assumption has always been, okay, they will use the money lawfully. So when you pay it into, it's rather like going into a shop and say, okay, I'm going to give you £10,000 and you spend it in whatever way you want. And I'm just assume that it'll be beneficial to me. Of course, that's a horrendous assumption because they never do. So when we pay tax, we're making the assumption that tax will be used for lawful purposes, and it isn't. And we have to put a condition on and say, well, no, okay, I'm a sovereign human being. I'm in charge of my money and my life and my family and everything else. And I'm going to put a condition on to the payment of tax. You may only have the tax if you can guarantee that none of it will be used for a criminal purpose and all of it will be used for lawful purposes described in the budget, for instance. So that's the underpinning of it, is to say, no, I'm not going to accept that the government will use the money lawfully. And that applies to all taxes, including council tax and vehicle taxes for the DVLA and all of the taxes that go into the revenue and customs. And so therefore I say quite clearly, right, okay, you want me to pay £2,000 council tax or £10,000 capital gains tax to the revenue and customs? Of course I'll pay it if you prove to me that it will use solely on lawful, worthwhile purposes. Particularly lawful, legal, and legitimate purposes.
Okay, all right, and then I get that the trust is like a will is a sort of trust, right?
Yes.
Then what is it about trusts that HMRC or whoever can't just say, okay, look, you haven't paid us, give us the money anyway, we're taking you to court?
Well, it's one of the oldest forms of law in this country. It's called equity, and it's a matter. Basically, for 500 years or more, the Court of Chancery has been saying, okay, well, look, this all comes down to a person's conscience and whether or not you are doing things in good conscience. And we need a system because sometimes laws, say we have a law that says you may not go more than 20 miles an hour on this road.
Well, you may not travel 15 minutes further away from your house.
Precisely. Now, say that, somebody has an accident at home and you have to rush them to hospital. Mm-hmm. You may well go at 45, 50, 55 miles an hour to get to the hospital with the person who's had the accident as fast as you can, breaking the law that says you may not go at 20 miles an hour. Now, Chancery is all about, in breaking that law, did you do it in good conscience for the right purpose?
Right.
And you can get off the criminal offences because you were doing a humanitarian deed, if you like, in that situation. And you can't be prosecuted in the Court of Chancery. And the Chancery puts all these malicious, malevolent laws right in terms of a matter of conscience.
Okay. Now, the
trust is the vehicle for ensuring trust between parties.
Okay. Now, the Chancery, I understand, was a legal system that came about through people making representations to the king, to the monarch.
Yes.
And then the monarch got too busy and then delegated those decisions to, I don't know, lords or something, or barons or whatever, or judges.
Yeah, the Chancellor and the Court of Chancery, it's called.
Okay, okay. And that system, and when did that system start?
Oh
And when did
God,
trust start?
hundreds of years ago. I mean, basically, it's the oldest and um, it's going before Magna Carta, for instance. But the point about it is that it goes back to the fundamental natural law of identifying right and wrong and making sure that right happens and wrong doesn't.
Right. Okay. All right. So then the trust came out of that system, and what? How old would they be?
Uh, do you mean trust
The
documents?
trust that
Oh, they go back an awful long way. I don't know the full details of it. I mean,
yeah,
I've just been looking at what's relevant now in the 21st century, really.
right. And how? But how did they come about? What purpose do they serve?
Well, basically, it's a way of ensuring trust in transactions. So, if I want to transact in some way, quite a big sum of money between some sort of commercial transaction.
Mhm.
I need a sort of a third party between me and someone I don't really know or I don't know how to trust um, to ensure that the transaction goes properly according to my wishes. If I'm handing money over, say £100,000, I need to make sure that the beneficiary of that money acts according to the conditions I put down on the trust, so that my grandson, gets the money if he knows the conditions he's got to meet and he meets them. And
Right.
the trustee is holding the money and ensuring that the conditions in my trust are met. And if they aren't, then the trustee has to look at the secondary purposes or secondary beneficiaries and make sure that they are doing what they are supposed to do to meet the trust conditions, which I have set in the trust deed.
Right. Okay. So it might be like, for example, you're going to purchase some land
Yes,
from me, and we make an agreement, and you put it in trust, and then I have to do certain things with the land. Like, I don't know, like I have to clear the forest,
yes,
and then you'll make the payment, and then, but I want to make sure that the payment will happen. So then that condition is with the trustee as well. The
that's
trust,
right. You see, the trustee is a different so-called individual.
like an escrow service, sort of.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
And trusts and escrow accounts are very similar.
Right. Right. Okay. So the trustee makes sure that I clear the forest, and in
Then
the
you get the
time
money
agreed,
or whatever, I get the land or whatever it is,
and
the
you get the land
transaction.
without the forest,
Yes,
and then I get the money. So that
yes,
so this whole exchange goes on smoothly.
correct.
Okay. All right. And I think also, like, when people went abroad, they may have placed their money in trust.
And this
Because
is the great thing about tax havens, isn't it? The way our government avoids all taxes. In 50,000, 100,000 people in Britain, they all have large sums of money in trusts in tax havens. And the point about it is that if you put money in trust, it no longer belongs to you.
okay. Oh, okay. I'm going to come to that in a second, right? I'm going to give it. But for example, I'm off to fight the Crusades.
Yep.
Rather peculiar enterprise for me, right?
You're a bit late.
I'm a bit late and I'm a bit Muslim, so it would be peculiar on both counts, right? So I'm off to fight the Crusades, and I've got wife and children, and I've got a little fortune, and I'm going to make you the trustee to release some of that money, say every 6 months, to my wife and children, provided she remains faithful and they, I don't know, they behave themselves as well.
Yes, that's exactly it. And
Okay.
that was the origin of much of trust law, was during the Crusades, actually.
Oh, okay.
When people were away for 3, 4, 5 years and they had to get trusted friends to operate in exactly the way you're saying, so that their wives had money and so on.
Okay. All right. And then you said that there are 50,000 people, rich
Well,
people,
yeah, at
who,
least probably 100,000,
maybe more,
150,000.
right? But rich people, the elites, they put their money in trusts abroad, and then they don't have to pay tax.
Yeah, because it no longer belongs to them, you see. You hand it over, And if you put money in trust in the Cayman Islands and the income tax is 1% in the Cayman Islands or 0.5%, then the trustees in the Cayman Islands have to pay the 0.5% income or whatever it is on the trust rather than 40% in the UK.
Okay, but wait a minute. So I'm trying to get my head around this, right? So let's say I'm running a business.
Yep.
And I make 100,000 a year, and I
Yep.
have to pay 40%.
Yep.
Right? I put the proceeds, the profits from that business, the 100,000 in a trust in the Cayman Islands, and I'm paying tax 1% in the Cayman Islands versus 40% here. But can't HMRC say, look, it doesn't matter. You still earn the money. You owe us 40%.
Well, they can try, but the point is that you don't owe them 40%. You have made a business transaction or a trust transaction with the trustees in the Cayman Islands, and it's the trustees in the Cayman Islands who have the money. You no longer have the money to pay the tax.
Okay, but then couldn't ordinary people, regular people, do this and just create trusts, and then none of us have to pay tax?
Yes, yeah. I mean, we can all do it. It means putting all our money in the Cayman Islands, basically. But of course, then that would be disastrous for this country. So
Sure.
we have to find another way of doing it and doing it lawfully, which is why I have said, look, let's just limit this to taxation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a taxation trust, a deed of trust on all taxes. And so I'm saying, yes, everybody can have my money if they use it lawfully. And, and absolutely not a penny of it goes towards mass murder and genocide in Palestine or the Yemen or the Ukraine or Iraq, Afghanistan, all the rest of the horrendous crimes we've committed in the last 20 years. It's a way of keeping the money away from criminals.
Okay, but so I'm not going to put the money in the Cayman Islands. Anybody following your system, they put it in the trust in the UK. Well, what's to stop the HMRC say, well, look, we don't care about trust law whatsoever. We're going to take it off you anyway. We're going to take you to court.
Well, that's what they try to do. That's what the councils have been doing with me and others. But remember that this is the fundamental trust equity law in this country. Equity law trumps statute law and admin law and criminal law and everything else. It trumps the lot. And basically they can't do it because they're all doing it themselves anyway.
Well, that I can get, right? Because if they undermine the trust system, trust law, then all the uber elites, they're going to be liable for tax, right? But how do you mean it's the foundation because it's the oldest and everything else has sprung from it?
And it's based on conscience, and that's the important bit in a way. It's a matter of conscience, a person's conscience, and trying to describe right and wrong in society. That is the important fundamental for any society, is we need to agree between us what is right and what is wrong. And when that doesn't work out as we're expecting, we need a system to right the wrongs and put it right.
But then I just wonder if that could then be used as a way of undermining or destroying or invalidating the online speech bill, the Online Speech Act.
Yeah, it probably could. I've just focused on the transfer of money and property as described in the International Criminal Court Act and the Terrorism Act. And it's linked. I've linked it all the way through to the criminal offences for which my money is being used. And that makes it a criminal offence for me to hand the money to the council or the government or the DVLA if I suspect that some of it will be used for a criminal purpose. Now, more than suspecting, I know for certain that it will be. Therefore, I must, by law, withhold the money. Now, I'm not sure what the other examples that you've given, but I've focused almost entirely on the laws of war that have been broken by this country for the last 75 years.
Right. And then one thing for people who are watching this for the first time, I haven't heard you and I talk about this before, is you've used this system successfully for 7 years with your council tax.
Yes. And that's the important thing, is that, I have looked into the matters of conscience, which for me make it impossible to hand money to the council because I know it will be used for a criminal purpose. They
Yeah.
keep saying, oh, it's never used for purposes of terrorism and war and so on. And they don't know their own system. They use it all the time. 100% of it goes straight into the consolidated fund, which is the government's fund, out of which they pay for the mass murder and genocide and the weapons and the troops and aircraft and ships and all the other things that we use to dominate smaller, weaker nation states.
Yes. And to pay for the killing of women and children and men.
What's going on in Palestine right now is just utterly horrendous.
Yeah. Okay. Now, so every year, from what you told me, the council sends you a new bill.
Yeah.
Every year you do the deed of trust and the notice of, I can't remember the name, right? You fill in the trust documents and you say you can have the money provided you can prove by such and such a date that you're not violating these statutes. And then every year they zero your balance, right? They let you off.
Well, the council do anyway.
Yeah, the council do, right? They let you off for that year. And then come the next year, they send you a new demand for that year's council tax. And then you do the whole thing. So it doesn't build up or accumulate.
Yeah, correct.
Right. So it works. So one of the things I can see is that, especially with the cost of living crisis, people need money.
Yeah.
Right? Because the way the government are mismanaging, I think deliberately mismanaging the economy, then things are getting tight for people. Okay, well, you can protest against war and you've actually got more money to pay for extra food and fuel costs.
Yes.
That advantage.
And the important thing is to understand how that happens. So that just looking at the process of the trust, what I do is I put £2,000 into trust by writing the deed in such a way that it covers all the things we've talked about. I sign it and somebody witnesses my signature. And at that point, I put it into a strongbox in my cabinet together with, say, 10% of the £2,000. If it's £2,000 council tax, I put £200. Maybe £50 in cash, £150 in a cheque, or even £200 in cash plus a cheque to the council payable on the last day of the financial year, April the 5th, for the balance, say £1,800. So that the total comes up to £200. And when it comes round on April the 5th, I check as trustee of this trust. I've made myself trustee of the trust, and it's a separate legal role, and it's best to think of it as two different people in a way. As a trustee, I have to check that the conditions of the trust have or have not been met. If they haven't been met, then the trustee needs to tear up the check and pass the money to the secondary beneficiary. So it's not Johnny getting the money anymore. Johnny Council, whatever it is the secondary beneficiary. Now, I've written into the trust deed that I am the secondary beneficiary. So the trustee has to pay the money to the secondary beneficiary.
Right.
It goes around in a sort of circle, and they don't get the money.
Because they're using it for illegal purposes.
Absolutely. And they have used nearly £1 trillion of taxpayers' money in the last 20 years on mass murder and genocide, and nobody is doing anything about it. So we must start to do something about it and say, no, you will not have my money. I know it's a criminal offence, and under no circumstances whatsoever will you have it while you continue this appalling behaviour.
Great. I have the links in the description below, bit.ly/makewarhistory if people want to take this on and actually protest, because that £1 trillion could have been used for many, many other more useful, more constructive purposes than for destroying lives and livelihoods.
Yes.
Yes.
That's exactly it.
Okay, now you mentioned something about Scottish law before we started recording, Scottish law being different. And you also mentioned about how much money is being held in trusts somewhere.
Yes, I've been looking into this. It's important for people to realise that we have two legal systems in Britain, or three, in fact, with Northern Ireland being a sort of amalgam as well. But the law of England and Wales is common law based, and Scotland, since the Act of Union in 1707 or 9 or whatever it was, they had a French Roman law background, and they kept that, and so they've kept it ever since. So their system of law is different, and that's important in relation to trusts, because trusts don't work in, say, France or Germany or many of the European countries. They don't have the concept. It is very much an English concept that has spread amongst the English-speaking nations. So trusts are operation in America and Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and basically the old British Empire countries. So in Scotland, what happens is that the Scottish Law Commission did a big report on trusts and trust law back in 2007 or 8, around about that time. And it's very interesting, very useful document to read. And it basically implements the same system of trust as we've got in England. So in a sense, Scotland has an advantage. It has Roman law, which is based on statutes mainly, not the common law basis that we have here. But in relation to trusts, they have the English system. And so in that report by the Scottish Law Commission, they mentioned the fact that £500 billion was tied up in trusts, mainly for commercial purposes, in Scotland alone. Okay, £500 billion.
500 billion, that's a hell of a lot. And what does it mean, commercial purposes, and who's done it?
Well, I mean, again, you mentioned it earlier about if I'm doing a transaction and I want to put a commerce and I don't know the person who's getting the money and so on, I need to put it in trust until the conditions are met to my satisfaction or to the satisfaction of my trustees.
Right. Wow, that's an incredible amount. Absolutely.
It is. It's about 5 times the total amount of tax that Scotland pays to the UK, to England, Westminster, in a year. I mean, so it's huge sums of money. And that's the point about it, is that they have been using these systems against us for years. And we now need to start to transfer that and use the system they've set up against them to benefit us.
Very good. And then with the system that you've developed, and people can get to it from bit.ly/makewarhistory, download the documents, you can use this for capital gains tax, well, any sort of money that goes to the government in any way through its direct agents or any of its contractors or something.
Yes, I mean, that is important, that point you made there, contractors, because a lot of our money goes as indirectly to the government. So when, for instance, you pay your utility bill, which have gone up massively in the last couple of years, they are charging VAT on that, and maybe you've got a £600 utility bill to pay, so you will have 5% on that, which is what, I don't know, £30, something like that. And more importantly, when you pay the money to the utility company, for telephone, whatever it is, not telephone, telephones and water, gas, and electricity, and so on. When you pay that to the electricity company, you know that they will take the money from you and they will pay their staff. And as they pay their staff, they will deduct PAYE and national insurance from every employee's salary and wages and hand it straight to the government. So because you know that, it is a criminal offence for you to pay the utility bill, because you know that the money will end up in the government and the government will use 10% of that for mass murder and genocide. So don't pay your utility bills. Now, it's the same with large organizations. The banks, for instance, they are the worst offenders of all for a number of reasons. So when you put money in the bank from your employer, you know that that bank will be taking a bit of that money. They produce it just by writing it into a book, loans and mortgages and all the rest of it. Repaying any of that money to the bank is a criminal offence. And the directors of the banks, Santander, HSBC, Lloyds, the others, are actually the worst war criminals in this country, because they are, as well, through the Bank of England, making huge loans to the government every year.
Yeah.
In this year, where I think we're going to have a deficit of £185 billion, and that deficit will come from the Bank of England writing it into new loans, for which they then charge interest. So the government uses that money to buy the weapons and so on. And so all in all, what almost any transaction you do in this country is a criminal offence right now, because we know either directly it will go to the government or indirectly.
Right. And this also includes LTNs and ULEZ charges.
Yes.
Somebody's in a, violates or gets caught or whatever, gets, the ULEZ charge or whatever, they can download the trust documents, have it witnessed, and say you can have the money, provided you can prove that none of that money is going to go for the purposes of genocide or war crimes or terrorism by such and such a date. Otherwise, it then reverts to me as the secondary beneficiary.
Correct.
Very good. And then that way we get to campaign and protest against the LTNs and the ULEZ.
Yes.
Now,
there's another area that I want to raise, Rich. I think it's important. The 80 to 85% of all taxes come through corporations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the government gets 80, 82, 85% roughly of its income directly from corporations. So they are the main funders of warfare. Now, I was looking at a large hospitality company the other day that paid £760 million in tax last year to the government via PAYE, national insurance, and alcohol taxes and other things. The directors of that company need to know that they are each jointly and severally responsible for handing over £75 million, which will go to mass murder and genocide. Now, that is a criminal offence of conduct ancillary to genocide by each one of those company directors. So they need to stop straight away and to do the same thing that we're suggesting for individuals, which is to set up a corporate trust for all employees, for instance, and say, okay, now instead of me handing up, we'll take your PAYE and national insurance off you, but instead of passing it to the Revenue and Customs, we're going to put it into a corporate deed of trust, which ends on the 5th of April. And at that point, if the government hasn't caved in and stopped the war crimes, crimes against humanity, and killing of innocent men, women, and children, then that money is no longer available to the government, and we will hand it over on April the 6th, or the trustees will hand it over on April the 6th to the employees from whom it was deducted in the first place. So it's a simple way of making sure that all those payments of PAYE and national insurance, which get taken off your monthly salary or weekly wage, whatever it is, are returned to you, with an added bonus of the companies have to pay 12.5% corporate fees on top of all of that, contributions. And so you should also get that 12.5% back on top of your other stuff. So I really recommend straight away signing a corporate, an individual, and for yourself, and writing to your employer and saying, I've discovered it's a criminal offence to hand over the money, and we ask you to set up a trust on behalf of all employees. And again, they can download a trust deed for corporations and councils, so the council can do it as well for all residents. So we need to have these simple systems in place that everyone can use, and the more of us that start to use it, the quicker we will stop our government from killing innocent men, women, and children overseas.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And what we need people to share this message far and wide. If you're watching this and you're not sure you want to do this, well, maybe somebody is up for this. There is. And it is
no risk, by the way, Rich. Absolutely zero risk of signing this documentation. The risk comes when you send it to a copy to the council, and they write back and saying, this is rubbish, or it doesn't apply. They're wrong, but they don't know they're wrong. And so we have to, the more of us that do it, we can get together and prove in court that this is a genuine lawful trust.
Yes.
And if they break it, they are committing a criminal offence.
And then to prove that they're wrong, whether it's the council or HMRC or the Greater London Authority, they would need to reference some statute which says that the International Criminal Court Act and the Terrorism Act don't apply to them. And there's no such exclusion.
Correct.
So they are as bound by it as anybody, really. Okay.
Absolutely.
I think that's it. I mean, we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. There's so much more, right? And I will have you back on. Is there anything else you want to say, Chris?
No, I just want to summarize really what it's about. And that is that this is a methodology, a simple methodology for paying taxes into a conditional trust and making sure the government does what you want it to do, and you don't just give a blank check to the government to spend your money in whatever way it chooses. And we are reversing the power from the government to us as individuals.
Absolutely, absolutely. Chris, thank you so much. And anybody who's watching, please share this video. And by the way, this applies in all countries that are signatories to the International Convention for the Criminal Court.
It's the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. That's the particular laws which are being broken by some of those countries. If a country is signed up and doesn't use any of its money to murder people overseas, then this doesn't apply. This particular trust deed doesn't apply there.
Right. Okay.
It also is difficult to apply it as a trust in Roman law countries. So it's the laws of war can be applied anywhere, but you wouldn't necessarily do it as a trust in France or Germany or some of the Roman law countries.
Right. Okay. Okay. And I understand you're working something out where people can. The website will have country-specific.
We're trying to move to that. Yes, exactly. At the moment, we've got it going. There's one or two examples in New Zealand, Australia. I'm hoping very soon to get something going in America and Canada. And so the main Anglo-English-speaking countries, if you like, it does apply. And it's the sort of common law basis of our law system that has lasted for more than 1,000 years. And we need to start using it.
Very good. Very good. Chris, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. And if you have comments, questions, put them in the description below. Please, please, please share this video far and wide. And between now and when I see you next, please keep filling your pockets with protests and freedom. Crypto Rich and Crypto Chris signing out. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.